just after Miami, that is south of Miami. From there it begins, and you have the Caribbean Sea, and surrounding that, so all the islands that are there, that particular area where you have Jamaica, St. Lucia, Trinidad, Tobago, then you have St. Lucia, then Haiti, all these islands combine together to form the Caribbean islands. So the literature that is produced from these particular islands, or the writers who are from here, and the literature has been produced from these islands, that forms the Caribbean literature. So the literary works of the Caribbean written in Spanish, French, or English. So that is, the language is also such that because it has a kind of a colonial history where they have been ruled by the Spanish, the French, the English. So therefore, even the works that are written, they are mostly in Spanish or French, English. So all these taken together, that entire literary oeuvre, it is called the Caribbean literature. So according to a Caribbean writer, Edward Brathwaite, he is one of the most famous poets and also a critic of Caribbean literature. So he has told that the literature of Caribbean has no indigenous tradition as such. And whatever culture in the form of rock carving or inscription and oral tradition was there did not survive. So it was like in the 16th century there were the American Indians who were there and who had oral traditions, and they used to inscribe inside caves. But of course, because there was nothing written, and the people also did not survive to tell the story of their own culture and tradition, that culture is mostly lost. So that remains a minority today. And after the American Indians, the West Indians populated the islands, but unfortunately they too did not have a written tradition, at least not before 1800s or 1900s. Before 1800s you did not have such a very unique or indigenous West Indian tradition where they are writing their own languages in their own languages or their own stories. Later on, slaves were brought from Asia, Africa, and the colonizers from Europe also stayed back there. So what remained as the literary output was a mimetic representation of the cultures that ruled over these islands. So because there was Spanish rule, so the islands where they had the Spanish people ruling over, the Spanish language started proliferating, and the people started using those languages along with their own languages, of course. And then where the French ruled, there was the dominance of the French language. Where there was the British rule, and the English language dominated. So what happened was that these cultures started getting reflected in the people's minds, and of course any tradition or culture that remained were basically subdued. They were not coming to the surface because of the dominant culture. That's what usually happens in any colonized country. So the colonial powers who ruled the Caribs were, as I said, Spain, France, Great Britain, and the Netherlands. Therefore, Spanish, French, English, Portuguese, and Dutch languages started to seep into the local languages. But gradually the people of Caribbean islands, that is the ones who were colonized, began to break away from European ideals and started to identify themselves with their fellow West Indians. So it was long after, after 16th century, long after almost 400 years later, that is in the 20th century, the people from the Carib Islands, they started to understand that what was going on, and Rather, they started to realize that they have neglected their own cultures for a very long time, and they needed to revive it. So they started breaking away from the very Eurocentric model or the very Eurocentric ideal, and they started to identify themselves with the West Indian tradition. That is the people who were there. Not only West Indian tradition has a mixture of African tradition as well. So this West Indian tradition and the African tradition together, and all these people were mostly black people, all were mulattoes. Who are mulattoes? Mulattoes are basically someone who has been born from a kind of a mixed inheritance, like if you have one white parent and one black parent, so the offspring of one black and one white, they are called the mulatto. So gradually they started realizing that, so they started realizing that they're ignoring, they have not ignored, but they did not realize that they were losing their own tradition, their own culture. So what happened, that they wanted to restore the orality, their folklore, their culture and their art. And also a part of it was carnival, and also their art forms like this calypso, which we find in pantomime as well. So all these things taken together, they started to realize that there are so many things that their tradition and art had, all deal with performance and orality. So those things needed to be restored back. So they started seeing their own cultures and sought to preserve it. They started using local styles and also their own vocabularies. They started exploring the themes of innocence, then the exile and return to the motherland, resistance and endurance, engagement and alienation, self-determination and dominance in their works. You will see this is mostly a very common trope or common features in post-colonial literatures, where you see that these are mostly the themes. Here also we see that it is not very different. So in Caribbean islands, what happened is that, of course, because they were taken over, exile is a very prominent theme, because they were exiled from their own culture, they were exiled from their own tradition. So they had to return to their motherland. So how to restore their own motherland and the culture, how to return to their own lands and bring back that. And therefore, how do they do it? Through resistance and endurance, where you are not allowing the dominant, that is the colonizer's culture to dominate over you. So that is how you are participating in a culture of resistance. And there is engagement and alienation. Of course, alienation from the culture, because when you are living with a certain culture, of course, there is a give and take relationship between cultures wherever you are. If a foreign culture comes to dominate a certain land, the indigenous culture and the culture that has come, of course, there will be a certain cultural exchange, political exchange, economic exchange, and through many exchanges, you will not be able to understand who took from whom. So the word dominant and inferior doesn't work here. It is just a kind of an exchange between the two cultures, and what results is a kind of a hybrid kind of an existence, a hybrid kind of an identity. That is what we will be exploring in the Caribbean literature and all the other literatures that you will be studying in all the other papers. So you will be seeing that there is a hybridity, there is a kind of an exchange which has led to that hybridity. So of course, in then self-determination and dominance in their works, of course. So what is self-determination, dominance, as in like to stress their own identity. So therefore, Caribbean literature provides a powerful tool for post-colonial studies, of course, so which is also a counter strategy where the empire writes back, right? So you have this empire writing back a book by Bill Ashcroft, Gareth Griffiths, and Helen Tiffin. So this is a very important book, or maybe you can take this as a starting point also for your fourth semester. This book will be very important because this particular book is available online on LibGen, and you will see that they are talking about various cultures and various places where there is resistance, and how these countries, they have written back to the center. So of course this is basically writing back to the center. So now when I'm talking about writing back, it is mostly about how the art is manifesting itself through the writing of all these people in the colonized states, how they are constantly trying to overthrow the Eurocentric model, how they are trying to counter the Eurocentric model, how they are constantly trying to dismiss or destabilize, decenter the entire culture of being, a dominant culture, the dominant whites. Or here you always see that there are binaries working. So how to destabilize this binary through these writings. So even in Caribbean literature, we see that the Caribbean writer operates within a kind of a polydialectical continuum. Why polydialectical? Because there are so many dialects. There's Spanish, there's French, there is English, but at the same time they have their own languages. So one of them being like the Creole language, and the other being the Pidgin language. So Creole, it's a new word for you, Creole, Creole, and the other is Pidgin. So Pidgin. So these two languages, what are these? So these dialogues or these languages are basically a part of a cultural theatrical language, which of course, as I said, dismantles the authority of the English. Now Pidgin and Creole languages, they have been derived from the trade and the contacts, which have been there in their own cultures. Yeah. So what is this term Pidgin? Pidgin. The term Pidgin, okay, the name of the book is The Empire Writes Back. I had told you about this in the first semester as well, when I taught you The Tempest. So Empire Writes Back is an important book, and this is kind of a starting point for you in the fourth semester. It will be very handy for all the papers, especially paper 402, 3 and 4. Alright, so all these three papers, it will be very important for you. So try to read the ones especially for this book. I can just give you the portions that are important, and you can write it down and go through them. Alright, so one is from this particular book, there is the introduction, which is important. Alright, so you read the introduction. It's just 12-page introduction. That's easy. From chapter 1, you have the black writing model, and then there is a particular subdivision called models of hybridity and syncreticity. Alright, so models of hybridity and syncreticity. This one is particularly important in connection with Walcott. Alright, so that is in chapter 1, the last section. Then you have in chapter 2, which is talking about language basically. Here the portion that is talking about a post-colonial linguistic theory, the Creole continuum, this particular portion is important. Only this one will be important. So post-colonial linguistic theory, the Creole continuum. Alright, so this is the subdivision, this is the division which you have to just go through it. And as of now, I think only these two and the introduction will be enough for you. As we move on, I'll just give you more things to read. As of now, only this is important. Okay. So coming back to Pidgin, that what is the Pidgin language? So Pidgin language is the language which has arising from the blending of one imperial language and an indigenous language. Okay, so Pidgin language is basically the blending of one imperial language. So let's say French and one indigenous language. So there are in Creole languages, there are many Creole languages, like the number of islands is equal to maybe the number of languages. So all of them taken together are called the Creole languages. Alright. So and what is the Creole? The Creole is the source language. Understood? So the Pidgin is the blending, that is the coming together of both languages, that is the colonizer's language and the colonized language, whereas the Creole is the input of several source languages. So many source languages come together to form the Creole language. Okay, so how is this different, or how is this like it's almost like for example, don't confuse with Indian languages or source languages. Indian languages also, you see that we hardly, like, we have Hindi language, which is a very dominant language in India, but also there are certain languages which are spoken which are very area specific, which are very region specific. So all those languages, like South Indian languages, you can see that there is a kind of language, they have their own syntax, they have own lexical features, right? They have their own grammatical structure. Also when you come towards the northeast and West Bengal, you will see that Oriya, Assamese and Bengalis, they have a kind of a lexical pattern, right? They have a kind of a grammatical structure. When we hear it, we understand the Assamese language or the Oriya language. If we just hear it too hard, even if you don't know the language, you still get to understand what they are trying to say, at least make a sense of it. So the Creole languages are also like that, where they have their own, also the Pidgin, they have their own features, they have their own grammatical structures. And they are not inferior languages, they are just languages on their own. It's almost like the African languages trying to preserve their own languages. So like the Yoruba clan, or there are so many other people trying to preserve their own languages, trying to write in their own languages. So not trying to infiltrate with the colonizer's language. So they are trying to preserve the authenticity of their languages. So similarly, we see that in all the cultures that you study, African or Caribbean, there is a kind of a struggle to preserve what was theirs, to assert the identity, because what is their own preserves the identity, right? So
ma'am,
yes,
the Pidgin language is not clear.
Pidgin languages have basically have come from African origin. Pidgin languages are of African origin. Now there have been slaves who have been brought from Africa to the Caribbean islands as slaves. Alright, so when they were brought as slaves, they started to reside in the islands. Now when they started staying there, they, of course, what happened is that they had their own languages, and the dominant, that is maybe the European culture dominating them, or maybe the French, the Spanish or the Portuguese. So whichever language dominated them and their own language together, when they started, what happens is that, suppose you have a Nepali friend, right? And you have a Nepali friend and you speak let's say Hindi or Bengali. So let's assume that these two cultures have lived for a very long time. They will definitely take and exchange the languages, the languages in the sense that words or some grammatical way of speaking. So what will happen is, because of this exchange, a another language will evolve, which over the years will become the standard language. So that is basically the Pidgin language which happened in the Caribbean. Understood? So a few Africans settled in the Caribbean islands as slaves, but after a few years, like after the abolition of the slavery and after the independence, those people stayed back, right? But the languages also stayed with them. And because of the cultural exchange with the dominant culture, what happened is that they took languages from them also. So because of this exchange, over the years, another language started forming. Alright, so because of that, the result of the cultural exchange is the Pidgin. Am I clear, Ananya?
Yes, ma'am.
And the people who have been living in Caribbean islands for a very long time, alright, and they had their own very languages. Those languages, the source languages, okay, the very indigenous languages of the Caribbean islands, those are the Creole languages. So therefore these two languages are very important. What are the people trying to do is, now when the Caribbean writers, they are trying to preserve the language and trying to incorporate the languages in their works. This process is called creolization. Alright, so this is also another new word and a very important one. This is called creolization. Alright, so the process of creolization occurs at all levels of culture here, okay, and it is visible in a large scale in its effects and everything, but its operations are very localized, and you have to understand that this way of exchange and all of a sudden the emergence of this language is very unconscious. It is not a conscious effort to create a Pidgin language. Now the Creole languages are there, but what is creolization? Creolization is to bring this language and to enter and to make this language a part of your daily conversation. That is creolization, and not only your everyday language, but more so because we are studying this process, it is basically more in terms of writing the language and preserving it. So this entire process of bringing back the language and putting it into your daily existence as a tool to assert your identity, this particular thing is basically the creolization, and this entire way of doing it is called the Creole continuum, where not only the Creole languages are coming in, but also the dominant languages. In this case, and in terms of Derek Walcott, it is the English language. So English language and the Creole language coming together and becoming one language, where you're using the English and the Creole together and creating this continuum is called the Creole continuum. Understood till this much? Okay, so just give me a thumbs up, just write a message, so I can just give you a few examples of how this creolization works. So this creolization is a matter of individuals making adjustments to a multicultural setting. So you can just write down the points, okay? And I'm also recording, so I'm recording this lecture because I cannot record it like video. I'm not recording the video, of course, because the meeting is not being recorded, but I'm recording a voice thing, so I'll share the voice lecture with you all, okay? So this process of creolization occurs at all levels of culture, and although its effects are large scale, its actual operations are very localized and unconscious. So this is point number 1. Then point number 2 is creolization is a matter of individuals making adjustments to a multicultural setting. That is, creolization is a very fluid sort of space where all the time the two cultures are trying to adjust, where whichever language, whatever way you are talking, it just has to be very legible and understandable. So that is the way creolization is very fluid, because all the time you're making adjustments, because it's a multicultural and a multi-dialectical setting. So the process moves forward through small appropriations and accommodations. So as example, let's say one person who is cooking, like one cook borrows ingredients from another, right? One dancer learns from someone else's steps and puts it into his own dancing. Also a speaker modifies his language, so his listener will adjust, understand more easily. So this is what is happening, is that you're accommodating constantly. Suppose I go and start living in some other region in my own country. What will happen is that my cooking style will change, the way I'm talking will change, the way I try to make myself more understandable, that will be my aim, right? Or the way I'm cooking, that also will depend on the weather or the place I'm trying to stay, depend on the ingredients that I'll be getting. So many things depend on these adjustments, because there's always, no matter what you say, because this happens unconsciously, so this kind of an exchange will always happen. Therefore this continuum, this is the creolization that happened in Caribbean. So examples are like this, the example of a cook or a speaker or a person who has moved to another place. This works, okay? You just keep this in mind, so you will understand how this works. So now, example, two people are conversing and they happen to pronounce a word differently, both of them. So by the end of the conversation, it is likely that they will be pronouncing the term the same way. So when the two people started conversing, maybe person A pronounces the term in a different way and person B in a different way. But by the end of the conversation, you see both of them are pronouncing the same term in a similar way. It happens, like for example, in the classroom also. Suppose there are people who say genre, there are some people who say genre, alright? But if suppose I come to the class, or you just tell your fellow friends that you say it's basically genre, there's nothing called genre or something like that, it has to be pronounced as genre, then what happens, your group circle, your friends start saying it as genre. So what happens is that there's this shared pronunciation will be used by the two speakers only, right? So this is the way the cultural interaction happens. This or not only, see, it's not only about the cultural interaction, it is about any kind of interaction that can bring this change. So imagine this in like 100 years, how these words will go down to be used as a common vocabulary. So this is how the creolization continuum works. So the development of language in a multicultural setting provides the best documented and most readily evidence for the dynamics of creolization. So the Caribbean region constitutes the world's most extensive and the most varied state of creolization as a result of the different histories of enslavement and colonization that unfolded on each of those islands. The inhabitants have come from Africa, Asia and Europe, and as a consequences, many metropolitan languages are spoken. Now in addition, this region presents a uniquely different assortment of Creole languages. These languages have historical affinities with different European languages like French, Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, and they have developed along different lines and they stand in quite different relation to the languages and the colonizers spoken in the area. Now there is an example that you are thinking that okay, there's always assimilation, there's always an exchange, but here there is in Haiti. What happens, Haiti was a French colony, alright? So the dominant language then was French, but in Haiti what happens is that the Haiti Creole and the French language are not spoken together. there has always been a resistance. Okay, the resistance is not to mix the Haiti Creole and the French language, because it's almost like you will see that when we go towards the south, you will see the Tamilians not speaking Hindi, right? So there is a kind of like, we will not speak this language. So there in Haiti it is almost like that. So if there is this example, in Jamaica there is a different example. In Jamaica there is, so this particular place where the French and the Haitian Creole are not coming together, this is not the Creole continuum that I'm talking about, but what happens in Jamaica, that is Creole continuum. The Creole that developed in Jamaica is basically more African in lexicon, African in syntax, and therefore less comprehensible to the speakers of English. So in Jamaica, the creolization is more of Pidgin and Creole language there, okay, because it is more African. So of course the people in Jamaica understand that, but the rest of the Anglophone Caribbean territory, they don't understand that. So what happens is that there has to be a kind of an accommodation. So it is acceptable for Jamaican speakers to move freely along this continuum, so that they are uttering both English and Jamaican. Alright, not always combining them in the same way, but they are trying to make themselves understandable when they are talking. Now this is of course when we are talking about the speakers, but suppose when I'm talking about the writers, they are very conscious when they are writing. So they are very self-conscious, they make such aggressive choices when they have to write the languages, certain languages, like Walcott, when he's writing, he'll make certain choices that I will be writing this particular word, so because I want to assert this particular identity. That we definitely see in this particular play, pantomime. So the Caribbean writers, they make a conscious choice, and we have Brathwaite, who has a different take on language. Walcott has a different take on language. Now here also there are different writers who look at the use of language in various ways, and you have V.S. Naipaul also, who has a completely different take on their own culture. So there are many ways where Walcott is different, and Walcott is more accommodating. So for Walcott, what is it that he has actually thought deeply, very deeply about the matter, that how to use this language and how to put it together for the audience. So the language situation in his homeland is unique. Okay, he has made his reputation, of course, during this Caribbean's transition to independence, where any author's decision to, when he was writing, any decision to use Creole or to avoid Creole was highly politicized. So he had to choose very carefully which side he wanted to be, whether he wanted to use or whether he wanted to avoid, because it was a highly politicized situation. Now coming to Walcott's own life, he came from St. Lucia. Okay, so when he was in St. Lucia, the French colony, there was like a lot of passing back and forth between England and France during the colonial period. Okay, so sometimes this is England taking possession on St. Lucia, sometimes France is taking possession of St. Lucia. So what happened is that the resulting pattern of language distribution in that area is quite unusual. It is like a French, English and their own language, the Creole language. So what happened is a French-based Creole is the primary language of the rural areas. So the French, whereas the population is predominantly black and predominantly Catholic and also poor. So English is the language of the town. So French is the language, French Creole is of the rural areas, and English is the language of the towns. And so it is the language of nearly all islands Protestants. Okay, or so there is a difference like Catholic and Protestant, which is not very important in your case here anyways, but all St. Lucians, they have a kind of a mixed racial heritage, almost like Walcott, whose parents, like there's one white parent and a black parent, so he calls himself a mulatto. So there are of course varying degrees, okay, but there's no Creole continuum in the strict sense, because the Creole is grounded in different European languages. Of course there is the French and English and the Creole together. So Walcott is born to a middle class mulatto family, was a Protestant family, and lived in the capital. And during his childhood, he spoke English at home. Okay, but he learned Metropolitan French in school. But when he was growing up, then he went to Jamaica, and he started attending university there, where again it was a little bit different from what he had experienced in his lifetime. So what happened is that it is here that is national identity, this entire understanding of national identity, and atmosphere started to think that, what is his language, what is his identity exactly. And then he even no reason to think of his Creole as his language. He thought that, okay, maybe this Creole is my language, this language is the language of his people and of his country. So it is only in Jamaica that when he started attending university, that he could actually see that this movement was quite big. It was not something that was limited to St. Lucia, but it was quite big. And then he could see that there are people who are trying, because I told you, there are people who are trying to preserve the language vehemently, and here there was this orality, there was this tries to save their own culture, their own tradition, and so many other things, the folklore, that they started preserving their language in the written form so that it is not lost. So the poems, see, we are doing we are doing this particular play, but when you will be reading the poetry of Walcott, poetry of Walcott gives a truer sense or more wider sense of what creolization means. You can just go and see, there's like Nobody's Nation, and he has also written on, the Crusoe. So he has gone back to the center and has subverted the meanings what the center has tried to through the use of Creole. Okay? Now, a little more about Walcott, where what he actually was trying to do. Derek Walcott was someone who, when he was doing this, when he had a sense that he had to preserve this Creole languages, and he had decided that he will write in this language but also will accommodate English for a greater audience. So when he was growing up, he had a kind of a desolating sense that nothing is genuinely original, or nothing original could be created on this Caribbean islands because of a long history of colonization. So there its inhabitants or its artists have been doomed to a kind of mimicry, and they probably will always just replicate what the other cultures have been doing. So this is what also V.S. Naipaul's idea is, that the Caribbean islands can never free themselves of mimicry, and whatever they do will always result in mimicry. Now mimicry is a term used by Homi Bhabha, which you can also just put it aside, about which we will talk later. Just know that mimicry, it's almost like replicating the dominant culture, and where in trying to whatever originality or whatever you're trying to produce, somehow or the other will just be a copy of the dominant culture. So this is what Derek Walcott was giving into. But in Walcott's, he even though this was the case then, because the people were doing this, but after a point they started to they started to at least go for it. At least they started to struggle to preserve whatever they had. So Walcott, what he did was, he tried to build a professional theatre company in Trinidad, and for long 20 years he tried to establish that, but of course he could not pull it together, and he could not make it a kind of a successful way of preserving theatre, and of course it ended in failure and delusionment. All right, so now this sense of West Indian cultural mediocrity, this of course was set in all the things, like in poetry, or say in the novels, or the playwrights, the plays. So But even if the company did not survive, but what was very important on all these 20 years is there was a kind of a growth for Trinidadian carnival. Like in Trinidad, the carnival was quite famous, so that aspect of it was quite famous and people went out to see it. And so from here Walcott got the idea that maybe there is this folk imagination might survive, and he started to, maybe this is what speaks to the people more. So the carnival aspect, the carnivalesque, the folk imagination, and of course combining it with the Creole languages, probably this is something that will appeal to the audience more. So this has deeply influenced and shaped the West Indian theatre. So by borrowing the characters, stories and images from their rich oral tradition, and through the inheritance of the imaginative world of the folktale. So Walcott, of course, has made use of this in an extensive way, and therefore he is one of the major dramatists there. So he has called himself a mongrel, okay? Mongrel because again mongrel is kind of a bastard, which is a kind of a mix of two cultures, and he says neither proud nor ashamed bastard. So Walcott has had a long and pioneering career in West India and the Trinidadian theatre. So when he's writing, he's writing in Trinidad. So you'll see that even the text has the Trinidadian theatre written there. So he is specially, of course, he is a West Indian theatre writer, but specifically to the Trinidad culture, and he has faithfully, stuck to his mongrelism, where he is hybrid identity, and he also does that in his poetics because he himself is a mulatto, all right, and therefore he has put in this particular style in his poetics, constantly experimenting with his theatre, with his range of theatrical form and then genre and the theme and everything else. So he has exploited the narrative and the formal possibilities of folktale and the legend that were there, and then he has written all sorts of plays, all right, all sorts of plays. Like he has of course taken Homer's Odyssey, he has taken the, what should I say, the European classics like Robinson Crusoe, then Homer's Odyssey, then he has written tragic comedy, then he has written comedy and farce, which is like the pantomime, and many more. So he therefore calls himself that he is a writer, and his style is a mulatto of style, okay, where his efforts to purify the language of the tribe inevitably invite accusations of treachery, assimilation, pretensions, and playing white. Now, when he is talking about mulatto, of course, he is bringing in the English language also, right? And therefore, he has been accused of not maintaining the authenticity, and therefore, people have accused him and criticized him of assimilation. But this is what he believes in truly. This is what he believes will bring a kind of a cosmopolitan nature in his writing. So he is not trying to appeal to only the people in Caribbean, but he is trying to move forward and make it universal, so that the reach is more. And therefore this Creole continuum through language, how he is subverting the entire game, or how he survived, or how he is writing back to the nature, writing back to the empire, is it will be successful only if it goes to a kind of a universal level. If his audience is not as big as the Eurocentric models, then how will he actually write back? So he has developed this style of writing very consciously, and what he has done is to bring this together and form this Creole continuum. And the Creole continuum, the more fluid it is, the better, because you have to constantly accommodate the elements, where if this fluidity, the third space, as Homi Bhabha calls, if the space is not fluid, if the space is not constantly changing, then of course it fails the entire thing. Then it is definitely not something that will be reaching out to people. So this is a kind, the play itself talks about it, also performs it. So the play is a very conscious effort on the part of Walcott to showcase the culture of his own hometown, and also he is trying to say people how the effects of colonization has taken a toll on them, how the master slave dialectic has changed over time, how this space is also very fluid, how the language is very fluid, and he has done it brilliantly with his performance. And there is a lot of performance in the play. Of course, the play's name is pantomime, so there is a relevance to it. So it's a pantomime. So you will see how there is a kind of mime there going on throughout the play, so the people are performing through language, through body, and through their own existence. All right, so there is this master slave relationship which will also be explored. So if you have studied, you'll see that how there are only two male people here who are also like projecting the east and west binary. How we see towards the end that this east and the west, they no longer remain the east and west, but they are somehow enmeshed into each other, and you cannot see who is east anymore and who is west anymore. So there is no permanent identities anymore towards the end, and this is what Walcott has been trying to do from the very beginning. Okay, so